Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to another episode of China Update, where we discuss leading political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's #2 economy. My name is Tony. For those who celebrate it, I hope you're having a happy Easter weekend. It's been a big day and big week in China developments, so let's jump in. And first up, we begin with our ongoing coverage of the US-China trade conflict. The Trump administration appears to be intensifying efforts to use global tariff negotiations as leverage to isolate China from key international markets, a space we have been following from earlier this week. With dozens of countries seeking exemptions from President Donald Trump's sweeping new tariffs, the US is pressuring allies to take steps that would limit Beijing's ability to bypass trade restrictions through third-party nations. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has emerged as a chief architect of this strategy. As we discussed earlier this week, during an April 6th meeting at Mar-a-Lago, he pitched to Trump a plan that hinges on enlisting allies, particularly in Asia and Latin America, by offering them tariff relief in exchange for concessions that target China. A person close to the White House, speaking to US-based Bloomberg, reportedly expressed, quote, "The theory is get all of Asia but China to the table, incentivize them with lower tariffs, and US companies will leave China," end quote. The US is also exploring so-called secondary tariffs on countries that facilitate trade flows with China, a move aimed at pressuring Southeast Asian nations such as Vietnam, Cambodia, and Malaysia, which often serve as final assembly hubs for Chinese components. China sees this as a serious threat, and indeed this week Xi Jinping, the General Secretary of the country, has traveled to these three countries. Tomorrow's episode will look into this trip and whether his efforts have borne any fruit. Mexico is already feeling the pressure of this US strategy. Officials expect Washington to demand higher tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. In Europe, the effort has been met with mixed reactions. Talks with the EU have yielded little progress, with Trump's team showing little willingness to lift the 20% tariffs currently imposed on European goods, though we do know that this has been temporarily reduced to 10% for 90 days as negotiations are ongoing. On my other channel, Market Update, we've been following these European negotiations, and in today's episode that went up an hour ago, we also discuss specifically the concern that this trade war may push the Europeans closer to China and why it's not quite that simple. Bessent has signaled out Spain for criticism, warning that pivoting toward China would be, quote, cutting your own throat, end quote. Despite escalating pressure on China, Trump has left the door open to a potential deal. Quote, the ball is in China's court. China needs to make a deal with us. We don't have to make a deal with them, end quote, the White House press secretary said, quoting the president. However, Beijing reportedly wants Washington to appoint a trusted negotiator, demonstrate greater consistency, and refrain from inflammatory rhetoric before engaging in talks. We discussed these demands in detail in yesterday's video. Trump's encirclement strategy relies heavily on foreign governments accepting a more adversarial stance toward China, something many remain reluctant to do. At the same time, the administration's unpredictable tariff policy, which has also targeted allies like Canada, has undermined trust in the US as a stable trade partner. Nevertheless, the US does have the most attractive market in the world, and China hasn't exactly made friends with many in the developed world. Whether this ambiguous strategy will shift China's behavior or alienate allies in the process remains to be seen. But for now, Washington appears to be betting that collective pressure, not unilateral confrontation, will yield results in its long-running trade standoff and security competition with China. This will be a space that we continue to follow closely. Meanwhile, US investors could be compelled to divest up to $800 billion worth of Chinese equities in a worst-case financial decoupling scenario, according to Goldman Sachs. The estimate includes $250 billion in American depository receipts, ADRs, $525 billion in Hong Kong listed shares, and smaller holdings in China's onshore equities. The warning comes this week as trade tensions escalate and concerns resurface about the potential delisting of Chinese companies from US stock exchanges. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent's recent comments that, quote, all options are on the table, end quote, have fueled fears of a renewed crackdown on Chinese listings. Goldman analysts estimate that forced ADR delistings could cause a 9% valuation drop in those shares, with the broader MSCI China index falling 4%. Exiting these positions could take time. US investors may need up to 119 days to offload Hong Kong stocks and 97 days for ADRs, though A-share sales could be completed in a day. The GrainShares CSI China Internet ETF, with 33% in ADRs and 72% US ownership, is particularly exposed. Indeed, divestiture would be devastating. Goldman joins other banks, including JP Morgan, in warning that index removals could trigger passive outflows of up to $11 billion, heightening market volatility. The world has entered a new Cold War, and we are witnessing history with the showdown between the US and China. One of our missions on China Update is to follow this critical story closely day by day. If you want to be part of this journey as we witness history, consider subscribing to China Update, hit the bell notification icon, and you will be on top of all the most salient developments as they occur. And if you're getting some value from today's episode of China Update, don't forget to hit the like button. Next up, outside of trade, security tensions between the United States and China also escalated this week, following US accusations of a Chinese satellite company aiding Iran-backed Houthi rebels, and that major American banks are facilitating funding for a Chinese firm with alleged military ties. According to senior US officials speaking to UK-based The Financial Times, Huang Satellite Technology Co. Limited, CGSTL, a commercial satellite company with close links to the People's Liberation Army, PLA, has been supplying intelligence to Houthi militants in Yemen. This imagery, allegedly used to target US Navy ships and international vessels in the Red Sea, has prompted repeated but fruitless warnings from the Trump administration to Beijing. Quote, "The United States has raised our concerns privately numerous times to the Chinese government on Huang's role in supporting the Houthis," end quote, a senior State Department official told the Financial Times, calling China's inaction, quote, "yet another example of China's empty claims to support peace," end quote. Tammy Bruce, spokesperson for the State Department, was more direct. Quote, "CGSTL is directly supporting Iran-backed Houthi terrorist attacks on US interests. The US will not tolerate support for foreign terrorist organizations such as the Houthis." End quote. Beijing has expressed concern over instability in the Red Sea, a key trade artery, but has denied knowledge of CGSTL's alleged involvement. The Chinese embassy in Washington said it was, quote, "not aware of the relevant situation," end quote. Founded in 2014, the company has previously come under US scrutiny for reportedly providing satellite imagery to Russia's Wagner Group. Experts say the company is a key part of China's military-civil fusion strategy. Quote, "Huang is one of a handful of ostensibly commercial satellite companies that are deeply embedded in China's global surveillance network," end quote, said James Melvanon, an expert on Chinese military affairs. At the same time, this week, the US House Select Committee on China is pressing JP Morgan Chase and Bank of America to pull out of a planned Hong Kong IPO for Chinese battery giant CATL, citing its alleged ties to the People's Liberation Army. Representative John Molina, the panel's Republican chair, warned that backing the company could expose banks and investors to, quote, "significant regulatory, financial, and reputational risks," end quote. His letters linked CATL to potential military applications, including PLA submarines, and pointed to its listing on a Pentagon watch list. He further accused the firm of being connected to human rights violations in Xinjiang, claims that both CATL and Beijing deny. These dual developments reflect growing bipartisan concerns in Washington about the overlap between Chinese commercial enterprises and military ambitions, amid rising geopolitical and economic friction. And finally for today, Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang has made a high-stakes trip to Beijing just days after the Trump administration abruptly banned exports of the company's H20 AI chips to China without a license it's unlikely to receive. The restriction follows heightened US national security concerns, particularly about Chinese AI firm DeepSeek, which has been linked to China's military-industrial complex. According to the UK-based Financial Times, Huang's visit included meetings with Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng and DeepSeek founder Liang Wenfeng. Discussions reportedly focused on designing next-generation chips tailored to Chinese clients while navigating both US and Chinese regulatory frameworks. Quote, "China is a very important market for Nvidia," end quote, Huang said during his visit, as reported by state-run broadcaster CCTV. He expressed hopes of continued continued cooperation with Chinese partners despite tightening US controls. Huang's outreach reflects Nvidia's efforts to salvage its foothold in China, which has accounted for a substantial portion of its AI chip revenue. The visit also underscores the tech industry's growing entanglement in geopolitical tensions as Washington seeks to blunt China's AI advancement. Recent US briefings warned that DeepSeek, despite its claims of being a private firm, maintains links to the People's Liberation Army and sanctioned defense research institutions. A report by Exeger revealed that many of DeepSeek's researchers had ties to China's nuclear weapons programs and military-affiliated universities. Meanwhile, Chinese firms are pivoting. Citigroup analysts note that cloud service providers are expected to replace the now banned H20 chips with alternatives from Huawei and Cambricon. Nvidia has privately argued that export restrictions are ineffective, as Chinese players are already narrowing the technological gap. But with Washington hardening its stance, Huang's China visit may be one of the company's last chances to shape a compliant path forward. Veteran China analyst Bill Bishop observed on the news today, quote, "I understand why Huang would be very worried about losing the PRC market, especially given the progress Huawei is making. But this is a risky move for the company, given the growing US government concerns about DeepSeek and Nvidia sales to China." End quote. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. It's been a busy last few weeks. Admittedly, recently doing 2 channels every day at the same time, especially with everything happening with the US-China trade war and with the general global market volatility. I feel like I might have bitten off a little bit more than I can chew. It's been very, very long days, but it has been a tremendous pleasure to produce both the China Update and Market Update for you all. For me, it's a privilege, and it's tremendous fun, and it's a wonderful learning opportunity for myself, and I'm very grateful that I can produce these episodes and that you all come along for the ride with me, that we can share this together. So for this Easter season, I just want to express my gratitude to you all for allowing me to do work which I love and sharing it with you all. Thank you so much. Thank you for watching today's episode. Have a good Friday. Have a lovely weekend. For those who celebrate it, have a good Easter. And I will see you for another update tomorrow.